You shouldn't be trying to, at all costs, to win a piece of business when you go beyond what's acceptable for your own company.
Welcome back, my lovely people, to another episode of the B2B Sales Trends podcast. Today, we're diving into a challenge where what commercial organizations face in terms of a topic a lot of the times. I'm super excited to be talking today about competing in RFP-driven environments where the rules are sort of written a long time before the document even appears in people's inbox. Most teams react to RFPs, very few influence them, and the difference between those two behaviors is often the difference between winning and burning time and resources and not winning. Today's guest has spent years leading commercial teams across highly competitive industries, and he's about to step into a CEO role going forward. So he brings both the sales and the leadership perspective to this topic. We are going to talk about where RFPs really begin, how top teams shape opportunities early, and what great leaders do to move their people out of their comfort zone, out of that reaction mode, to really handle these tricky things called RFPs more effectively. Patrick, it's great to have you with us. Let's jump in.
Sure. Good afternoon, Harry, and welcome to everyone. I'm very proud and pleased to be here this afternoon and talk about, as you rightfully said, basically a process which we all encounter in our commercial daily experiences. But at the end of the day, very small but important steps basically differentiate or separate the good from the great. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today.
Love it. Let's talk about who you are. You're stepping into a new role, senior level role, after years leading commercial organizations in highly competitive RFP heavy industries. Give us a short version of your journey and the experiences sort of that shaped how you think about commercial leadership today, Patrick, if you would.
Sure. So I'll keep it brief regarding my own, career development. So I work in freight forwarding. So for people who don't know, we move actually physical goods from A to B, right? In freight forwarding, it's a very asset-light business model normally. So you come across a lot of RFPs and RFQs in your life because the industry is predominantly driven by RFQs. So I've been basically spending all my life in freight forwarding. It was a career choice. I always tend to say, because people always ask the question, how do you end up in freight forwarding? Right? Is this not an industry which is very attractive? And I always say no, because right after I finished my studies, I basically said I want to work in an international kind of environment. And the industry where you are right from day one automatically in an international context is freight forwarding, because it always starts with somebody sending stuff from point A, which is normally not in the country you live in, to point B, which might be even another country you don't live in, and you are basically the middleman to coordinate and choreograph the physical movement of that particular shipment. So it was a matter of choice. I've always worked, or long time worked, in commercial roles. I also went from a commercial perspective. People always said to the dark side, meaning the product side, so the service delivery side. So I also spent time there, running P&Ls, restructuring certain business areas, etc. But always kept my commercial role. And let's say the last role I had, I served as the chief commercial officer for a mid-sized family-owned freight forwarding company. And as you rightfully said in the introduction, I'm at the moment enjoying garden leave, although the weather in Germany is not that nice to really enjoy your garden. But I escaped that for a certain period of time. I'm on garden leave because I'm in transition to become a CEO as of February next year. So that's going to be an exciting step. And I think what that also tells you in a nutshell a little bit about what I think about commercial leadership today. Very often in, let's say, industries, particular service industries, when you look at the composition of a management board, not a lot of commercial people normally tend to sit there, right? So if you look at, let's say, especially in our industry, across freight forwarding, and you would count the number of people who really sit at the main board with a commercial role or background, that's a handful, right? And I don't mean this in any way disrespectful. It's a business which operates at very thin margins, so you have to be operationally savvy in order to be successful. But very often you somehow neglect the voice of the customer at the top position at the main board. And that very often leads to, let's say, comparable service offerings, and not really talking about how can you differentiate in times where customer differentiation and customer experience is a big area where you can win or lose. So sometimes people tend to forget that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where this monster of RFPs comes in, right? That nobody likes. It's exactly that. How do we make your offering comparable to everybody? Because if the only differentiator is price, and I can buy from you, you, or you, or you. RFPs are one way to drive these prices down. So let's go back though to that journey where RFPs really begin. In many organizations, sellers treat an RFP as the start of the sales cycle, when the reality is often a lot of the times that's where it ends. The point where thinking is already formed, is already shaped, is already created in the mind of the potential future buyer. From your perspective, where does the RFP process actually begin? And what do sales teams often do wrong or misjudge about that early stage?
So I think, as you rightfully said, the RFP should always be the end point of a sales cycle, right? So you shouldn't be starting with that point. If you do so, then you should really, for yourself, first and foremost, rethink your priorities, because if you enter an RFP or an RFQ, as you already mentioned, Harry, in the beginning of the conversation, it's an expensive, detrimental exercise to any organization. It steals your time. It steals the time of a lot of people in the organization. And with stealing, I don't mean this negative, but it occupies resources, be it people, be it time, be it money at the end of the day. So you should really see this as the end point of your sales process. So ideally, what you do is you have long before an RFQ has been released, talked to people who sit on, let's say, the influential side on the customer or the buyer, and really understood what they are trying to accomplish. What are they trying to bring to market? Because very often at the end of the day, an RFP process is designed by purchasing departments to what you also said, make it comparable and discuss about price and service offerings. But very often, especially in businesses which are a little bit more complex, and service businesses are normally always very complex by nature, there is way more things to find out throughout a discovery process than what you would always find in any RFQ document or RFP documentation, right? Because even if you have hundreds of pages of RFP documentation and specifications, you find almost no cases where this, at the end of the day, reflects 100% of the operational reality of the buyer. So it's really to identify and map out throughout that entire, let's say, preparation phase, who are the people at the end of the day being affected by the RFP, right? Because it might not be the purchasing team at the end of the day, because they actually run and execute as an important stakeholder the RFP process, but they don't articulate requirements, they don't articulate business necessities, because that's always decided on the buyer side, with the people owning, let's say, operations, production, supply chain planning, etc., etc. So you should always be looking at how much can I really spend my time and energy in discovering what they are trying to accomplish, and then match that with my own capabilities, right? Is that what they want? And have I really understood what they want? Is it clear to what they are trying to accomplish? And once that is clear, does that actually match with the things you can bring to the table, right? Is it something where you can differentiate yourselves, where your service offering is reasonably in line with their expectations, or is it so far off a stretch that at the end of the day, you will probably not be successful because there are many other players out there who are way better positioned to offer what the customer really wants. But that particular that particular process of deep preparation before an RFP is actually articulated is important, because not only that you understand what's later on written on the RFP, and you can potentially also influence. I hate the word influence, because normally your influence is somewhat limited, but you can at least shape, understand, and bet through good questioning, etc., shape certain aspects of an RFP. You have also understood who are, let's say, the right stakeholders and sitting on that buying consortium, because in today's world, a lot of RFP environments are run through buyers consortiums. So you have a lot of people on the buyer side being involved, be it finance, be it operations, be it planning, be it purchasing, whatsoever. So you have also understood really, when you did your homework well, like who sits on that buying consortium and who are the people who at the end of the day make the final call. Because that might not be purchasing at the end. Sometimes they do, but sometimes and very often they don't do. They are just the gatekeeper of the entire process. So again, treating the RFP as like the end of your of the sales cycle, just basically is in line with what I just described, and that normally separates the good from the great.
Hey, a quick pause here, because if you're leading a sales team right now, you will want to hear this. We've just released our new report, the 26 Sales Trends for 2026. It's pulled from the conversations we've had with senior leaders on this very podcast. The themes, the shifts, and the realities shaping how customers buy and how teams need to sell in the new year. It's practical, it's concise, and it's built to help you make better decisions faster. You can download it for free at the link in this description box or at globalperformancegroup.com. Now let's get back to the conversation. It's a really good one. Let's break some of those elements that you've shared down a little bit further. Sure. and put some context around that for our listeners. In our pre-call, you told us a number of interesting stories that you basically have lived through, or your team has lived through. Let's talk about a moment that your team has shaped that RFP process early. So high-performing teams create their advantage in a way long before procurement formalizes that. You've touched on that a second ago. Can you walk us through an example where early engagement really allowed your past team, I would assume, to shape the direction of an RFP? What did they do that made that difference?
Yeah. So I want to give perhaps a more recent example from the past team I was allowed to lead. So a lot was done, and predominantly what is hard is if you are, let's say, a first encounter to an RFP, or you're trying to develop a new customer where you have not enough tribal knowledge of an organization yet on the supplier side to really understand what they want. I mean, if you have a customer who you work with for like 20 years, you have a tendency to better understand who are the people you need to talk to. You normally know their cycles, the people who decide, etc. So that's normally less of a relevance there. You have to be a little bit more cautious of not becoming complacent and knowing too much, right? That you build something into an RFP which actually the customer is not asking for. But the recent example is about really developing a new client, right? And what the team did is predominantly not shaping directly or influencing directly the outcome of the RFP in terms of the technical specification, because that's what the business of the customer requires in a certain way. But what they did is basically positioned the company as being different in terms of how we approach service, people, relationships, how we basically differentiate ourselves in terms of quality, etc. Long before the RFP actually started, right? So it was really mapping out together with a couple of people who were on the other side, helping us to open those doors to say, like, okay, who are the relevant people to talk to? How do we influence discussions, conversations around, should we be even considered being invited to an RFP? Because normally customers or buyers who have a lot of selection or selected suppliers already, they first and foremost ask the question, so why would we consider a newcomer coming to the table, right? So what's different? What can you actually bring? And that kind of conversation was taking place like at least 18 months before we entered the RFP. So it's also a pretty long commitment as an organization you have to go into to say, I recognize the 18-month effort of a person or a team building up that story, that credibility, that relationship, that influence before you actually see an RFP landing, right? And a lot of people get nervous along those lines because they say, but when are we actually seeing something? When are we seeing results? And in commercial organizations, trying to influence stuff can sometimes take a long period of time. So that was a very concrete example where we really started to shape, because the buyer was a multi let's say, business unit consortium. So you couldn't even say there's one requirement which matches or is relevant for the entire organization or bid process. It was multiple business units from different industries all under one roof. And it was really trying to map out who are the stakeholders, who are the decision makers, how can we influence, get in front of them, talk to them, start to also get a feeling for, is there a desire or a willingness to make a change? So if you are the newbie, right, so why would they select you? Why would they may take that risk, which very often is a personal risk as well, in recommending a new supplier coming to the table, because there's cost of change involved, etc. There's a certain risk involved, etc. Sometimes you need to redo IT interfaces whatsoever. So really to map that out and understand, like, okay, not only you want to know who are the people making the decision at the end of the day, but also are those people ready to make a change, or are they just saying, yeah, you can participate and let's see what comes out of it, which normally doesn't send a lot of strong buying signals. So really going through this entire validation process of what I said earlier, do we see a realistic chance of contributing with something which is different? Do we have positioned ourselves in such a way that they see us as a logical alternative to what they have today? Because at the end of the day, you still have to compete in the pricing exercise. Yeah, I mean, you can't explain why you are 40% off versus your peer group. Then you have to have really good arguments, which normally you don't get. You can certainly talk about a price gap because you have validated certain, you have certain, let's say you have certain expectations you build into the pricing models, etc., which you can't really validate until you get the business, etc. So, but all of that has happened and then actually led to a business win right from the first RFP we participated, right? And that gave us the confidence to continue, because all of a sudden you are no longer the newbie, now you're an incumbent, but you have still only understood a fraction of their business. And now it was the time to then continue that work to you get yourself better positioned for the next RFP coming. And over a course of 3 years, including the preparation, it took us from zero to a multi-million-dollar business win, which was a great story to talk about internally as well, on how you influence, shape the direction of an RFP process very early on.
Great example. You mentioned the word validate a few times in your story there. Is there a way of early qualification that needs to happen in a process like that? So to really say, you know what, this is not winnable business for us. We're not going to even try to influence the RFP or shape the criteria of the RFP. It's not really business that we want to have. So is there a level of qualifying or disqualifying that needs to happen with RFPs as well?
I mean, there are certainly technical, so the short answer is yes. So there are certain technical elements you can look at, right? If you as a company have certain rules around, I don't know, payment terms or certain technical aspects of the business where you say, I don't want to even entertain these kind of conversations because they will end up nowhere. So even if we, by whatever chance, get the opportunity to win business, we might actually not entertain that because it's against our own rules. Be it, as I said, payment terms. So if a customer says, I want 180 days and your internal criteria says 60, I mean, why even spend the amount of effort to try and talk about that? Because you're not going to bridge that gap, right? If there's a clear expectation on the one side and a clear willingness to only do a certain thing on the other side. But when I say validation, I think that's the art piece of sales. I always said sales is a combination, or commercial is a combination of art and science, right? So there's a science part to it. You can look at metrics, numbers, technical things, etc., as I just described. But then there is an art piece to it, and the art piece is really when you start to talk to a potential buyer or buyers, to get this feeling for, is there a desire and a willingness to do to change, right? Is there, in the conversations you're going to have, are people willing to share information? Are they helping you to understand what their business is all about? Or are they like a closed door environment where they say like, yeah, you'll find out in the RFP, you'll find out in the RFP, you'll find out in the RFP. So they basically push you back all the time. I think that in combination with the technical aspect, so that's really combining the science and the art part, that gives you a pretty good validation feeling at the end of the day around, is that something to pursue or not? Yeah? Because if somebody pushes you away all the time, it's a little bit like when you're trying to date somebody and that person never responds or gives very short answers or ignores you or ghosts you on WhatsApp, right? The likelihood of winning that heart of that person over is pretty low. And I'm not saying you should throw in you should give in all your efforts right from day one when somebody doesn't respond. I mean, sales is also about being persistent. Right. But if you have really like tried 20, 30, 40 times to get under the skin of somebody and get into an organization, not only through the same person, by the way, but you tried different avenues, different techniques, different possibilities, and the organizational response is like, stay away, then you should rather stay away, right? And I think that's something when I talk about validation, which you can only get and find out once you talk to the people trying to, if you speak to the sellers and who have these good antennas, that you really have an honest conversation to yourself, to your own team, but also to the buyer. Is that something worth pursuing on both sides? Because it's not only cost involved on your side as the seller to work on an RFP. There's also cost associated to that on the buyer side. So let's be honest. Let's be humans. If there's nothing to win for both, then let's leave it. Right? That's the ultimate question to ask at the end of the day if somebody doesn't really open up.
So we talked earlier about the importance of you don't like the word influence, but shaping the criteria or shaping these certain elements of what potentially eventually comes out in the RFP, and the importance of that. Now, what are the consequences if you don't do that? We've all seen teams jump into RFPs, that looks attractive on paper, and yes, we'd love to win it, but where they really had no prior involvement prior to the release of the RFP. What typically happens when organizations pursue these RFPs that haven't really shaped the criteria at all prior to that?
Yeah. The very short and sad answer is you aren't going to win this business. So you might see always a very inflated pipeline you're looking at, right? So you see a lot of projects, a lot of RFPs in your CRM or in your internal data. But then when you look at actual hit rates on how much you win from those opportunities and from those businesses is very minimal, right? And that gives you an indication that this validation has not been done properly, or that influencing has not been done properly in the beginning, because I'd rather see a smaller pipeline. And I will talk to that in a second, what I mean with smaller pipeline with a higher hit rate, because that normally means you are focusing on the right effort. What I'm also saying is, when I say small pipeline, I don't mean you should only have like one, and that is your only bet you are putting your luck on, right? Because things can always happen. People want to buy businesses, sometimes go in with crazy prices, whatever happens. I mean, we've all seen this in our lives. You need a reasonable, good pipeline, so you have opportunity to also walk away from a project if you see there's no chance to win it, right? So you shouldn't be trying to at all cost to win a piece of business when you go beyond what's acceptable for your own company. So you need to have a reasonable pipeline, also as a seller, to say, how do I get to my annual targets, etc., by having a reasonable pipeline with properly qualified RFPs, etc. So at the end of the day, I'm going to hit my quota and everything related to that. But coming back to your question, you will see a lot of RFQs being like going through a process and a pipeline with zero outcome, right? And then what's even worse and always drove me mad is, even if you then, and that can happen sometimes, RFPs arise, you get all the logical arguments from somebody saying why we should be doing this, and you do it, you don't win, and then it basically goes dead silent, instead of using the opportunity to try and understand with a proper post-mortem process, like why haven't we been able to win internally, but also with the customer together. I think that's very often missed, and that's what I'm seeing, right? Or what I've been seeing is, yes, there's a lot of pressure out there. People want RFPs, or sometimes even your own colleagues come around and say, I've heard from a competitor or from peers I know that they are participating in an RFQ. Why are we not, right? And then you have to explain as a commercial organization why you're potentially not working on that one. So you sometimes have that conversation twice, internally and externally, right? And sometimes you have desperate people also within the organization that they say, but we want to work on more RFQs. And you say, yeah, but wait a second, working on more RFQs doesn't necessarily produce more result, right? It's not like, it's not a linear process that you have 10 RFQs and you win 1 million. If you have 20, you win 2 million. It doesn't work that way. And that continuous explanation and education to the organization is one thing, to your own organization is one thing. So you also keep the pressure away from the sales teams to just produce RFPs and numbers, because I think a lot of companies have fallen into that trap to try and do more in the hope and in the desire and the wish to win more, rather than looking at how do I actually win more by influencing early, by having the right people asking the right questions, by really pre-qualifying a lot. Are these the right industries, right customers, ideal customer profiles, all that kind of stuff. So that's I think how you avoid that what you just described happening.
I know you've coached a lot of salespeople over your time, or in your time. Let's talk about that coaching aspect of things. How do you move sellers out of that reactive sort of mode? You know, when an RFP lands, the instinct is a lot of the times and very often, great, let's respond. Fantastic. Thank you for the opportunity. Let's go. When can we get it to you?
Yeah.
Sort of thing. Really good leaders slow that sort of instinct down a little bit and examine what is that real opportunity. How do you coach sellers to shift from a sort of a reactive to RFPs towards let's influence this opportunity, let's validate it, let's make sure we are shaping that criteria early? How do you do that as a leader?
Yeah. So I think there's two things. One is, as the leader of that function, you basically set the framework for people to operate in, right? So if you set up a hamster wheel where people just are rewarded for being busy, but not for creating impact, then of course you have set up the whole thing for failure, and then you can't even coach along those lines, right? So you need to first really think hard and a lot of times about what's the kind of framework I want to create for the team to operate in, and how do I basically make sure that framework is understood to the sellers, but also to the rest of the organization? Because as I said earlier in the last comment was, very often you have to also explain it to the organization why you do certain things or why you don't do certain things, right? So you have to first create that framework of saying quality counts, right? Impact counts. So if you worked on 3 RFQs and 3 out of 3 are successful, I'd rather have this than having 15 RFQs and you only have been winning 1, right? So it's not about mass, it's about the quality you get at the end and the impact you generate with that quality. So that's about designing the framework. And once you have that framework up and running, and that it goes to bonus schemes and however you incentivize, motivate, structure teams, conversations, etc. Once that is clear, so your North Star on how do I actually run a commercial organization is pretty clear, and the direction is clear, then you start to coach people along those lines, right? Then you can say like, look, okay, let's go away from this reflex of just creating RFPs or being registered with a company and they invite you to an RFQ, but you haven't really done anything with it. So then you start to basically help people to go through that process of saying, okay, how many questions have you asked? How many meetings have you had beforehand, right? Have you basically understood can you explain to me in simple words what they are doing, what they are trying to achieve, and why they would make a change, right, in order to select you as a partner or keep you as a partner. And very often you see a lot of people struggling with those very simplistic sounding questions already. And then you basically coach them along those lines by also shadowing them, going with them, helping them through, and say, like, don't get nervous, right? But continue to prepare yourself, because preparation is really key and king to a successful RFP process at the end of the day. Work on alternatives, so don't lock yourself into just one opportunity, because if that dies, then you have a problem as well. But have a reasonable amount, really make sure you understand how decisions are articulated on the buyer side, etc. And let's sit together, and let's also use other people in the organization to help you with that. So normally good sellers are also good networking people who understand that they might need the help of other people to basically be successful. So I think in today's world where, as I said this in the beginning, you see on the buyer side a lot of consortiums or a lot of people being involved in articulating a decision, you need to go away from a mindset perspective as a salesperson that you can be the only one talking to all those people. That will not work, right? Just simply from a time perspective, it will not work. But secondly, also from a personality point of view, it will not necessarily all the time work, because if you have, for example, with a large prospect, where a finance guy is involved on the buyer side, hey, there's nothing easier to bring your own finance people or CFO even to the table and have that conversation about what they are trying to achieve from a financial perspective. Because then the finance guy talks to another finance guy, right? If a sales guy talks to a finance guy or vice versa, this might not end up very well, because they sometimes talk different language, etc. So what I'm trying to say is also build your influence network, not only on the buyer side on identifying who those people are, but also on your side, who are the people I need to bring to the table to conversations in order to make this a meaningful and impactful conversation and preparation process before the RFP lands, right? So that is really the combination of the two things. So create the right framework as a leader, so people can actually work in that framework, and then educate people along those lines once they are in their daily routines, and make sure you as a leader don't allow those kind of things to slip in, so that people are just busy and working on RFPs without proper outcome.
When do you walk away from these things? That's a question, because if you decline an RFP, it can either, make or break your win rates of the year. What do you expect sellers or sales teams to bring to you as a leader before you approve an RFP pursuit? And what are sort of the signals that tell people or tell your team to say, no, it's better to walk away from this?
Yeah, I think this, you need to have a very clear selection criteria process on, and as I said, this is technical, but also from a feelings point of view, right? So you cannot always do it and rely only about technical aspects of when should you walk away. So you can of course set up an ideal customer profile and say, like, this should be in this industry, should be this size, should be this risk, should be this payment term, should be whatever, right? So you can articulate hundreds of technical criteria, but then really is also about sell it to me, right? So sell it to me as a commercial leader, or sell it to the organization. Why should we actually invest time and effort in working on that, right? So what has the customer told you? Is it really something where we can see a joint future, etc.? So if you then combine those two and again, you also have people sitting in your organization being involved in the RFP around the table, and you look at the opportunity and you say, we have 9 out of 10 people are not really convinced, then you should rather walk away, right? If everyone says, yeah, let's go for it because it's the right customer, right questions, right meetings have taken place, we see a cadence of activity before the RFP has actually landed. Yeah, we have sometimes even engaged on senior level with the customer because the person has pulled us into those conversations. What I just talked about, the influential network from your own organization, etc., has been involved. So you also lock people into saying yes because they have been part of the process. I always call this the IKEA phenomenon. So once you have built something yourself, you are much more in love with it than when you're not part of the process. So if you're part of the process, the likelihood that internal stakeholders say no is smaller than when they are not involved, right? If they're not involved, they are always like asking tons of complicated questions on why the RFQ should be done. If they are part of the process, very, very, very often they advocate very vocally for running the RFQ, and that also helps them to shape and influence in your own organization certain outcomes and decisions, obviously, to be successful. So I think that's the kind. So you have to set up a forum where you very openly and honestly can discuss, is this something we should be working on? Because if you look at larger RFQs, and I think that's what a lot of people tend to forget, we have done the mathematics in our last company around that. So if you run a large international bid process within your own organization, you easily talk, if you calculate man hours, everything together, sellers being involved, management being involved, pricing people being involved, technical people being involved, lawyers, everything, right? So if you do an average calculation of a multi-country international RFP, you talk about easily 20 to 50,000 euros per RFP, right? So it's a real cost to the business. And a lot of people, I think, tend to forget because they say, yeah, but it's costs which are anyhow in the company because we just run it through an RFP team and a tender management team, etc.
Yeah, but still,
but ask yourself the other question. So if we have less numbers of RFQs, we probably also need less people to run it, but with the same or even better outcome, right? So if that would be your company, you wouldn't be doing it that way. So I think that's also about financially educating people around, hey, there's a cost associated to it. And I always asked, that was always sometimes my killing question. So I said, like, if you would have to pay the 50,000 now because it's a large RFQ from your own pocket, would you do it? And then people very often said, like, no. And then you knew that, like, they were probably not convinced enough, right? I mean, it's a hypothetical question, but it gives you sometimes this immediate reaction that somebody said, like, oh, no, I wouldn't be doing it. Or you can do it a little bit different, say, if I charge your cost center now with 50,000, would you be doing it, right? And very often then people say, like, oh, no, I wouldn't be doing it. And then you know where you are.
So if a company, based on what you said, if a company wants to, raise its RFP win rates, let's say next quarter or the next 2 quarters, and they want to start doing something now, what is your recommendation? What they should start be doing now, what they should stop doing now, as well as what they should be continue to do. So what should they start, stop, and keep and continue to do if they want to increase their RFP win rates in the near future? What would that be?
So they should immediately look at their own assessment criteria and their assessment process, right? Is the assessment process leading to the outcome we all desire, right? So if it's just like a weekly call and every RFP has been presented the same way and you don't really have a forensic idea on how you want to select the good from the bad, that's what you need to implement immediately, right? And that will drive your hit rate up in the next quarter, because you can't change the pipeline in the next quarter, because very often those kind of discussions have taken place like a half a year ago. And RFP processes normally, on at least in our business, are an annual process. So once you have passed that point, you have to wait another 12 months until the RFP arrives again. So you can't change that. So what I would say is very quickly start with, am I objective in assessing the opportunities rightfully, right? Or am I just assessing this as an administrative task in terms of, we just next one. So, okay, we heard that one, that's a go. Yes, next one. Okay, we heard that one, next one. So really be specific about why should you be working on an RFP going forward as of tomorrow, right? So is that clear to everyone? Is everyone also aligned against that expectation of what a good RFQ looks like, and what are the necessities to be successful? Is everyone aligned with that? So that you need to start immediately, because again, it's not only the seller being involved in an RFP process on your side, it's also pricing people, technical people, etc. So is everyone aligned with what makes a good RFP and how can we be successful? And is everyone willing to contribute at the end of the day to make it a success as well? Or is it just like, we all approve, but afterwards everyone disappears, right? And doesn't want to be involved any longer? Or is it like, where really people say, no, I'm personally involving myself, I'm committed to support that. Stop chasing your tail in terms of accepting new RFPs in such a period of time, right? So if you're already like full and you see that your teams are dying because they can just, let's say, process the documents, but not really make up their mind about how can we differentiate, are there certain areas where we want to focus? So they just produce an outcome, but not an output, right? or the other way around, they produce an output but not an outcome, that you should also stop immediately. So stop taking RFPs on board, which basically just dump the organization and or sink the organization further, right? And continue with the ones where you have seen success, right? Because every organization has some people in a seller's environment which are miraculously more successful. Find out why. What are they doing different, right? Ask them, involve them also perhaps in educational pieces or coaching pieces. Can they actually help other sellers to be more successful? Can they, because obviously they are doing something wrong, they're producing results and outcome. Can they be part of, let's say, the assessment process as well, and look at those and say like, hey, perhaps you haven't asked the right questions yet or whatsoever. So these are the three things where you can very quickly see a turnaround in hit rates going forward. So do less, but do it better. And it will improve your hit rate, not mathematically only because you do less and have a higher outcome at the end of the day. You could also always argue mathematically you can also do that. No, but real impact to the business, right? So that's what you should be starting.
Are you up for a quick lightning round on 3 questions, quick fire?
Sure, go ahead.
Great. I know you are currently waiting to start your new role, but the question is, what's the one thing that instantly resets your mind and your mindset after a tough day at work?
Normally it's yoga.
Oh, interesting. Okay, good. What are some of the small daily habits that keep you grounded in your high pressure leadership jobs?
Yeah, it's again being aware of who you are, and that you are only also one person. Even as the senior leader of a team, you're only one person to create success. Yes, you might be a very large element of that success as well, because you have to select right team, etc. So it's not a rapid answer, but to really stay humble, right? You have a role as everyone else has a role. Stay humble. Don't overrate your, let's say, impact to certain things in the short run. And that's how you basically create this daily habit of grounding yourself, saying like, yes, I'm part of this. And my role as a leader is to make people better.
Interesting. What's the one word you would describe sort of for perfect sales conversation?
Curiosity.
Love it. Last question in every single podcast where I ask is, what are, in your opinion, the 3 top qualities that define elite sellers in RFP-driven environments? What are those top 3?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, and that's, I think always, every one of us looks in the mirror at one time of the day, right? What I always try to say to all of my salespeople is, you are supposed to do the following. And when you look at the mirror, you see it every day. You have 2 of these and you have only 1 of this, right? So you have to listen twice as much as you talk. You're never going to talk a customer into something. Well, people still say this. Sometimes people can talk people into something. I get that. But use the ratio 2-to-1, right? Use your listening skills. And with listening, it's not just sitting there and waiting for people to tell you something. Listening means active listening with curiosity, as I said earlier, of trying to really find out what they want. What motivates the business? What motivates the person making the decision for the business in order to be successful? I think the second one is persistency. So not giving up too early, right? Really going in and in and in and in and in again, taking a no as a motivation for doing it better next time, right? So not getting pissed off by no's, because if you can't deal with rejection, then certainly the commercial or the selling environment is the wrong job for you. So you have to deal with rejection all the time, probably in a ratio from 9-to-1, right? Or 10-to-1, that you get 10 no's for 1 yes. And you have to love that, right? If you don't love it, then you should be considering perhaps a different career path. And it's not about being right or wrong, but it's just a different career path, and you should be looking at that. And the last one is really, don't fool yourself, right? So don't look at artiflated or inflated pipelines or customers you have in your portfolio. Be honest about what makes me successful with the customers I have in my book of business or in my portfolio, which are the ones which just keep me busy but don't really deliver something, but they might look good on paper. Start with that brutal honesty to yourself, because normally people will discover that alongside the process, and it will be seen in the outcome you are producing. If you have a lot of, I would say, dead wood in your pipeline, people will see this at a certain point in time. So don't try and trick yourself and saying like, I have a great pipeline, everything looks good, and at the end of the year you're arguing around, why haven't I earned my commission yet? Don't fool yourself, right? Be honest about it. And if you think it's not enough, then reach out for other people to support you. Selling is no longer, in my point of view, a lone wolf topic.
Right. Patrick, you've been a wonderful guest on this episode. You've brought really interesting viewpoints to the topic of RFPs. Our listeners will very much appreciate your insights and your thought leadership. Thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you, Harry. It was a pleasure.
My lovely people, listening to Patrick today was very interesting, and you can't really miss the clarity he brought to a part of sales most salespeople and teams find chaotic and difficult. RFPs often trigger pressure, speed, and a certain reaction. But Patrick really reminded us today that the real leverage sits long before the document is issued and before it appears on your desk. What stands out isn't just his focus on this early involvement and influence and disciplined qualification. It's the way he framed it, not as control, not as force, but as a frame, a way of helping teams operate with intention instead of too fast, too soon, because you do have to commit resources, and that's an issue. Conversations like this show us that winning complex deals isn't about doing more. It's about doing the right things early and doing them with consistency. If you like this episode and it gave you a clearer perspective on the topic, share it with a colleague or somebody who you think might be benefiting from Patrick's view. Go to the B2BSalesTrends.com or to our YouTube channel. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. My lovely people, until the next time, look after yourself, your loved ones, and of course, your B2B customers. Bye-bye.